The two areas of control the United States continues to have, or the collective West continues to have, one is military power. But the second form of power they have is the power over information. In fact, BBC put out guidelines saying you cannot say that Nicolás Maduro was kidnapped. You have to say he was arrested. I mean, that's the level of information warfare.
What happened in the last 7 decades of the New World Order and how Venezuela is symptomatic of maybe the wait is ending?
The kidnapping of Nicolás Maduro has to be seen along the lines of what was done to Soleimani, what was done to Nasrallah. This is, in a sense, of the same caliber.
You said that there is a certain methodology in which regime change has happened. Very briefly speaking, if you would say point by point.
They may still be heartsick about the carnage in Gaza. But once you believe that Palestinian politics is terrorism, the Israelis have won.
Even after, when this information, when you write this manual, when you write, based on declassified information, people just don't care.
What the Iranian Revolution did was to say, we want to be a republic. I think that's what I focus on. Whether it's an Islamic republic or not an Islamic republic is not the question.
What does a sanction, economic sanction, and hard economic sanction do to a nation?
The demonization of Ayatollah Khomeini, for instance, that happens right away, provided a way to have amnesia about the role of the United States in Iran.
Because you mentioned fascism. So people want to fit into the classic way Hitler was fascist. No, fascism has evolved.
After the fall of the Soviet Union, the United States didn't want to tolerate defiance. I mean, all the people who defied were called rogue states. The Democratic People's Republic of Korea, North Korea, rogue state. Syria, rogue state. Venezuela, rogue state. Cuba, rogue state. Iran, rogue state.
Vijay Prashad is a Marxist historian, journalist, and one of the most prominent left intellectuals writing on imperialism, capitalism, and the global south. He is the author of several intellectual books, including Washington Bullets, which documents the history of coups, sanctions, and regime change operations carried out to defend imperial power. Vijay is also the director of Tricontinental Institute for Social Research, where his work is rooted in a historical materialist analysis of global political economy, tracing how colonialism, class relations, and capitalist accumulation continue to shape international order. Across his writings, he consistently challenges liberal and imperial narratives, foregrounding the experiences of the global south and advancing a socialist critique of contemporary capitalism and US foreign policy. So welcome Vijay Prashad Sahab on Nous podcast. And of course we had a conversation before this, and I got really excited to know the wideness and horizon of the topics and research that interests you. While reading the research document that was prepared for you, I had the hunch that there is a lot of theorization that you've done. So I got to really get to know that theoretical mind. So thank you very much. The first question I want to start with is post 1947, global world order emerged from a crass imperialism, visibilized coloniality and imperialism, to a very subtle sort of individualism, garbed imperialism, where institutions of impact and sovereign dilution were created, like IMF, like World Bank, which would appear to be in line with the expansion, growth, and development of all nations alike. But the way they were structured, it had a gravity towards certain powers of influence, especially the United States. It included United Nations, NATO, so in a way, military, diplomacy, economy, finances, all of it. And in all of that, what is happening is decolonization of world, in a sense that a certain sense of sovereignty is being given or is being taken by people who are part of certain geographies, and more than 200 nation states emerge from a colonial setting, and now everybody has a constitution, but nothing in economics in a sense is an isolated closed economy. All of this is integrated through global chains of interaction and capitalism. And in this context, what is assumed, like a Westphalian order, where every nation is sovereign enough that nobody else can, without international consensus, enter into other people's sovereign domain as a oppressive or as a military force. So one of the questions that comes to me is from your perspective, because you've written on it, where is in the history leading to Venezuela, there has been so many episodes where already all of this has been compromised and was compromising, and still Venezuela emerges as a special case, like a convergence of all of those failures of the world order, and which is becoming hyper visible. You don't need enough narrative building to do certain kinds of actions that at some point of time was expected, that there's a global war on terror. There's, now you need very little evidence, and where very little evidence and narrative making to invade Gaza, to to have geopolitics in Sudan, to do something like this in Venezuela. Please expand on what happened in the last 7 decades of the new world order, and how Venezuela is symptomatic of maybe the way it is ending.
Yeah, firstly, you've asked a very good question, but the question itself maybe needs to be moved around a little bit, because, in 1945, World War II ends. 50 million Soviet citizens and Chinese nationals died. 25 odd Chinese nationals, 25 million, 26 million Soviet citizens. I mean, they paid the price for fighting fascism. United States lost 500,000 people. The world order emerges with the world in ruins, except for the United States. It was largely unscathed by the war. It had enormous industrial power. It wanted to use that through the new Bretton Woods institutions, International Monetary Fund, World Bank, to shape the world order. But let's also remember that the UN Charter comes into effect 1945. This part of the world, Asia, Africa and so on, was struggling to come out of colonialism. So what did the Allies do? France returns to Indochina and Algeria to reassert its colonial right. In other words, to bring a new post-war fascism into the lives of the Vietnamese and the Algerians. The British tried to reassert their colonial right in Malaysia, in Kenya, in various parts of Africa, and of course in South Asia. It's not that 1945 happened and the British left. Wait a minute. From 1945, 46, 40, there were sustained struggles. 1946 was a year of strikes in India. The working class was struggling. The British wanted to hold on to their colonies. They were not keen on walking away. I'm going to come back in a second to the main colony. And the Dutch, who had been liberated, from fascism, go back to Indonesia and fight a dirty war against the Indonesian people to hold on to that vast country, which then wins its independence in 1948. So there was no liberal order. There was none. There was no liberal order. It has never existed. In 1948, the United Nations drafted and had a treaty signed called the Convention Against Genocide. Very important treaty. That same year, the Israelis decide to violate the partition plan and conduct the Nakba against the Palestinians, the catastrophe of the Palestinians. That same year, there was no liberal order. It has never existed. I mean, I'm not saying this rhetorically. I actually mean this, that it's never existed. The colonial order became the neo-colonial order, which is what Kwame Nkrumah called it. And it's interesting that in the last period, since the fall of the Soviet Union, you have seen that kind of naked aggression pick up from the collective West. Whether it's the attack on and destruction of Iraq, the attack on Afghanistan, the destruction of Libya and Syria, and then of course from the Oslo Accords onward, the betrayals that the Palestinians have faced, and then the great destruction. This has shaped the world we live in today. This sort of mad, naked display of power. The one thing that our institute did in 2024 is we published a text called Hyper-Imperialism, in which we argued that the Western countries are beginning to lose their control over economics. They are, in that sense, losing control over raw materials, over science and technology, to some extent because the US has sanctioned so much of the world, also losing control of finance. The one area where the collective West remains extraordinarily powerful is the military. The United States doesn't spend over $1 trillion a year on the military not to create something quite special. And they put that to display in Venezuela on the 3rd of January when they had 150 aircraft above the sky and pummeled the city. But nothing to compare to what the United States and Israelis did to Gaza, to Lebanon. I mean, I was recently in Lebanon, what they've done to southern Lebanon, how they killed Qasem Soleimani in Baghdad airport, how they killed Syed Hassan Nasrallah in Beirut. The kidnapping of Nicolás Maduro has to be seen along the lines of what was done to Soleimani, what was done to Nasrallah. This is, in a sense, of the same caliber. So Venezuela is actually part of a long history of neocolonialism. And in a way, there's another narrative which you can thread into this, which is what was done to Iran in 1953, where democratically elected President Mossadegh was overthrown. Yes. Because he wanted to take control of the oil. And in that sense, there's this other narrative, the oil narrative from Mossadegh to Maduro, which also makes captivating sense.
One of the things, of course, when I was reading through it and I mentioned it in a couple of notes of mine, the stark comparison with two intersectionalities, Iraq and Iran, what happened with Saddam Hussein in a way, with all of his, negative contributions, but as a sovereign leader, the way they supported him for a period of time and then they took him out as a sovereign leader and then took them to the US courts, as if US courts are some universally moral high grounds of judgment, where if a court, makes a certain judgment that is binding to all in a moral hierarchy. And the way in the Iran and Israel war that happened a couple of months ago, the way Trump and others remarked that they're going to take out Ayatollah Khamenei, like a sovereign leader, that there is threats for assassination of sorts, and then to actually take a sovereign leader like Maduro from Venezuela through military action for something like narco terrorism. So I want you to also expand on this idea of drugs and terrorism, and in a way, how much is it justified, because United States has its own borders. So if, for example, they don't want drugs in their within their domain. Like in India, everybody knows where drugs come from. So if the government really wants to take action on them, it can. There are the collusions from within also, and the state which is taking that into context also benefits from that in a way. So how do you see this also? The way it is not even very impressive the way they're building up narrative, and in the past whether this has worked.
Well, firstly, next month, our institute will publish a dossier called The War on the Poor, which is based on our study on the ground in Colombia, which is the main producer of cocaine. We produced this study working with the unions of coca growers. These are people who grow the cocaine leaf. We wanted to understand the whole structure of the drug economy from their perspective. And I think we produced a really good study. Most of the cocaine, everybody knows, comes from Colombia and the Andes. Almost zero comes from Venezuela. And this is documented by the Drug Enforcement Agency of the United States. It's interesting. They kidnapped Nicolás Maduro on the three basic charges. Number one was that he's the leader of a drug gang called Cartel de los Sols. Secondly, that he is in possession of a lot of heavy weaponry. And third, that he made money from drug trafficking, basically. Well, they've already decided that there is no such thing as Cartel de los Sols. It was a made-up category before Nicolás Maduro even entered politics. It was made up by a Venezuelan journalist in the 1990s. So they've already removed that from the charge sheet. Secondly, the United States has no jurisdiction over somebody in Venezuela, having weapons. That's crazy. You can't make that into a thing. That's a Venezuelan issue. And besides, I don't even know what they're talking about. I visited Nicolás Maduro in his house. I haven't seen any weapons lying around. He doesn't have a tank sitting in the front garden. I don't know exactly what they're talking about. The third one, that he's made money out of drug trafficking. Well, let's see the proof of that. I think it's completely ludicrous. He's a very modest person. He's not, he comes from a trade union background. He was a bus driver before he became a trade unionist. That was his profession. His father was a trade unionist. His mother was a devout Catholic. This guy is not corrupt in that sense. He's not personally corrupt. Now, when you sanction a country and you sanction the public sector, the state is not going to be able to do lots of things. So yeah, all kinds of corrupting things happen in a sanctioned country. That's what happens when you sanction a country. So I don't doubt that there'll be all kinds of channels by which commodities enter Venezuela, smuggling, this, that, and the other. That's a consequence of the sanctions regime. That's not a consequence of personal corruption. You look at all countries sanctioned, Iran, etc. They all have all kinds of mechanisms to trade their oil, to get some goods and services into the country, and so on. That's the nature of trying to go around the suffocation of your economy. So the charges against Nicolás Maduro are completely ludicrous. It makes no sense to me, frankly. I mean, again, the charge sheet was written by a child. I mean, there was a statement saying when he was in the National Assembly, he trafficked loads of coke. Loads of coke. I mean, that language doesn't belong in the charge sheet. You have to give me some numbers. How many grams? How many tons? What is loads? That makes no sense. It read like a charge sheet driven, written politically, not written legally. What was the actual evidence behind this? Okay, so that's that. But let's come to something closer. In fact, heads of government have been assassinated, have been taken out for the last 70 years. I mean, Patrice Lumumba was killed by British Belgian intelligence in 1961. Thomas Sankara was taken out in Burkina Faso in 1987. Chris Hani was killed in 1993, I think, or 1992, December 92, right before the apartheid state was formally dismantled in South Africa. I mean, we have lists and lists of people who we know have been assassinated because the CIA has informed us after the fact that they did it. They've overthrown countries by coup for generations now. I'm talking to you from Santiago, Chile. The president Salvador Allende overthrown in a coup and in a sense assassinated, in September 11th, 1973, just basically walking distance from where I'm sitting. So the point is that this idea of the immunity of heads of state and so on is not granted by the imperial power. They take out whoever they want to take out. And they've been doing it. Now they took out Evo Morales, in a coup, right after which I wrote a book called Washington Bullets. I was so angry that people don't understand how the CIA works. I decided to make a manual of how governments are overthrown. The United States is constantly looking to who are the dangerous people in the world that need to be removed or set aside. And you're sitting in India, just look across the border. I don't know, my friend, what happened to Imran Khan? Why is he sitting in jail? Somebody needs to go and do a proper study of that. Does Imran Khan really deserve such a long prison sentence? What is he charged with? Have you read the charge sheet? It is extraordinary. It is extraordinary because, you can charge somebody with anything and you can say to them, now prove that you didn't do this, but you're charging me with something ridiculous. I can't prove it. And let's finally come to the Palestinians. Since Yasser Arafat died, neither the Israelis nor the United States have allowed any Palestinian political organization to have a political status. And if those Palestinian political organizations try to exist with the leadership, they either kill or imprison the leader. Hamas leaders have been killed ever since Sheikh Yassin was killed. Islamic Jihad leaders regularly killed. Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine leader Ahmad al-Sadat has been in jail for 23 years, in Israeli jail for 23 years. Marwan Barghouti, the leader of Fatah, the most popular Palestinian leader, has been in jail for almost 24 years. So they have decapitated Palestinian leadership. This is treated as normal, because they say all these groups are terrorists. So the Palestinians then are not entitled to a politics. I mean, this is, in a sense, what has also happened to a number of Muslim leaders in India. You designate them as people under UAPA, you can depoliticize them, and then people no longer has a political voice.
Yes, of course. And as a product of people in CAA, the way they were, UAPA was put on them, and now a few years have passed, 6 years have passed. And recently the court judgment came where 5 people were given bail, except for 2. And for what? For what charges which have never been properly constituted. And there is no, meaningful display of, evidence which could actually say that, yes, they are responsible for this, except for the fact that in the popular consciousness, this myth has been created. And that popular consciousness allows the functioning of that state in that manner. But also, you mentioned about your book, Washington Bullets. Very briefly speaking, I would like to understand, you said that there is a certain methodology in which regime change has happened. Very briefly speaking, if you would say point by point, in the past few decades, what is that methodology that the US and its allies have employed and deployed to, to sabotage even democratically elected governments in their own sovereign geographical states?
Yeah, well, I mean, I was just looking at it earlier. It has 7 points or thereabouts. The section is called Manual for Regime Change. Okay, I mean, and I took this seriously. I wrote it as if it's a real manual, and I used only CIA materials that are declassified to lay this out. So, the first principle is lobby public opinion. So this is an information war. You start to come out there and say, Nicolás Maduro is a drug trafficker. We were going to deal with the drug issue, and suddenly you do this high pressure campaign where everybody's talking about narco trafficking. You start attacking these little boats in the Caribbean, saying they're carrying drugs. This is the Cartel de los Sols. This is Tren de Aragua. Any drug killing in the United States done by a gang led by that guy. So you lobby public opinion. That's the first thing you have to do. The second thing you have to do is appoint the right man on the ground. Now, in most cases, that's a U.S. ambassador, who's sitting there, who meets the generals, who talks to the different people, make sure that they build the elite in a correct way. In a way, the United States has struggled with this because they've struggled to find the right Venezuelan as well. They tried out, Henry Capriles earlier, then Juan Guaido, then Maria Corina Machado. And over time, they've realized that, nobody is really cut out for this. So who's the right man on the ground? In a way, Trump has said it's got to be Marco Rubio. Marco, you talk to people. You'll be the viceroy. He even appointed him the viceroy of Venezuela. So the second is you appoint the right man on the ground. The third is you make sure the generals are ready. Now, that's a conventional coup d'etat. When the generals move on the president's palace, like in Chile, you got to talk to Augusto Pinochet. You got to make sure that Augusto Pinochet knows that the dangerous generals, those who'll be against you, either need to be transferred, sent on holiday, or killed. And that's exactly what happens is generals are taken out. They are sent to an administrative desk. The most important thing when you conduct a military coup is to make sure the brigadiers are on your side, the people who actually run the brigades, the tank brigades, the air brigades, and so on. So the general has to be a commanding general, not an administrative general. So you got to get them intact. They have to be on your side. The fourth one is you make the economy scream. It's very important before you conduct a coup to create the conditions of suffering for people. You make people in the country start to lose their faith in the government so that when the government is overthrown, they feel a sense of relief that then you can remove the sanctions or you can immediately improve the conditions of life. So people say, yay, the coup helped us get milk at a cheaper prices and so on. The fifth one is diplomatic isolation. It's important, you start to isolate the country so that when a coup happens, the Europeans aren't going to say, well, look, it's a coup. What the Europeans are going to say is, well, we think there should be a democratic process. No European country has said the UN Charter is violated. Nicolás Maduro should have a fair trial or whatever. Nobody. They just said, we look forward to a democratic process, and that's doing the diplomatic work. I mean, that's very important. Then 6 is try to organize mass protests in the country to show, in fact, that there's popular support for the coup. So even if it's, the rich districts coming out on the streets saying, what is this? It's okay. Or you pay people to come out. In Iran in 1953, Kermit Roosevelt, the CIA agent in Iran, who was a nephew of the president, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Kermit Roosevelt had $1 million in cash, which he was handing out to people to come out and protest the government of Mossadegh. So that's the 6th. And then eventually the 7th one is you greenlight the coup. So somebody needs to say, go now. Because it has to all be very well coordinated. Otherwise, it's a complete disaster. I mean, so that's in a way what I wrote in the book. It's in a sense, it's a
Very interesting. It almost maps with all of the regime change I remember in recent past, including what is maybe brewing in several places right now as we are talking about it. In a sense that, and also I will connect it to the other point that you've covered about the dying power. In a sense, to be able to reclaim a place and space that it feels that it is its own, it becomes wounded in a sense that it tries to coerce others into the order, rather than convince them that this is the right thing. So in a way, if coercion is becoming the norm, that is also symptomatic of the collapse and certain anxieties within the order itself. If you would please expand on that.
yeah. I mean, okay. So no coup should technically be legitimate. No coup. I mean, if a coup occurs, because we have a UN charter, yeah, there should be no external interference to change a government. I mean, if there's an internal coup, that's a different matter. Yeah. If there's a coup internally, there are different procedures and mechanisms and so on. I hesitate to talk about when there's some internal problems. Let's not get into that for now. Let's stay with when there's outside interference. That violates Article 2.4.7 of the UN Charter. It violates, basically a whole run of it violates the spirit of the UN Charter, firstly, okay, apart from the letter. It actually violates the letter, but also the spirit of the whole charter. So in that sense, there's no legitimacy for the coup. So what's interesting is in when I made the manual has another section which is called deny. So you immediately deny any involvement, and you say we had nothing to do with it. And if somebody, if Ali Javed says you had something to do with it, well, Ali Javed is a conspiracy theorist. He's a well-known conspiracy theorist. We had nothing to do with it. Then 30 years later, you happily open the record and say, yeah, we did it. But now that was the past. We don't do it anymore. They used to do it. Now we don't do it. A government was overthrown. Oh, I wonder what that. We didn't do it. We don't do that anymore. So you confer legitimacy on yourself. That's interesting. You don't require the United Nations to legitimize you. You don't require anything. The United States as a supreme power, also because it has another section of power that's important. The two areas of control the United States continues to have, or the collective West continues to have. One is military power. Iran can be as sovereign and independent as it wants, but the Iranian government well knows that the United States can flatten Tehran. Iran cannot defend against a full-scale attack like what happened in Venezuela. If there's a full-scale attack on any global South country today, except China, I think, we will be flattened, because they have that capacity. We don't recognize it. But the second form of power they have is the power over information. I mean, we're going to do this conversation. You'll post it probably on YouTube or something. YouTube is owned by an American company. They own the undersea cables. They own the satellites. They want to slow down the transmission on this YouTube video. They'll do that. You'll get, I don't know how many views you'll get. You'll get some number of views. But listen, I'll say all these things to you, and that's wonderful, and we'll have a rich conversation. But meanwhile, as we're speaking, CNN is broadcasting into India. Okay, maybe millions of people don't watch it, but lots of journalists get their reports from CNN because they are told, go and write a story on Venezuela. They'll read something from Reuters. They'll read something from the Associated Press. And so then the Indian newspapers will copy these Western publishing companies and convey the news about Venezuela through them. So the information power is incredible of the United States. So they don't need legitimacy from you or from me or from the United Nations. They legitimize themselves. they will legitimize themselves. They will say Nicolas Maduro is a drug person. This is not a military intervention. It says, Marco Rubio says, a police action. In fact, BBC put out guidelines saying you cannot say that Nicolas Maduro was kidnapped. You have to say he was arrested. I mean, that's the level of information warfare. To use the word kidnapped can get a journalist in trouble. So you control the information, and this idea of the supreme power not seeking legitimacy from others is, I think, very important. The US legitimizes itself. And because it can then get into your head and tell you what we do is the correct thing, what others do is the bad thing, you start to believe it. I mean, let's go and ask people around the world. They are heartsick about what's happening in Gaza. They feel terrible about what the Israelis are doing, but they're suspicious of Hamas. That's entered their heads. They think Hamas is a terrorist organization, or the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine terrorist organization. That's gone into their heads. They may still be heartsick about the carnage in Gaza. But once you believe that Palestinian politics is terrorism, the Israelis have won. So now you have legitimized the Israeli action that you're feeling sick about.
I often say that on 7th October, what happened was the first information that was let out was that that Hamas has beheaded 40 children. And that, in effect, mobilized the geopolitical machinery of war, because it was so abhorrent for all of the Western audience and audience that consumes the Western media, that is something legitimately demands action. And in periods of weeks and months, what was realized that it was bogus. There was no evidence of it. Even US president used the report to argue the case. So in that sense, what you're arguing is that the asymmetry of power combined with asymmetry of information, it creates a consensus popularly within the world that drives certain actions as legitimate. But you also mentioned that declassification of classified information, that something happened 30 years ago. CIA did a certain coup somewhere. It was involved in Iran. And when 40 years after that, two questions arise in my mind. Why would a certain government who was involved in that, who wants that people should not know how it operates, it declassifies that information for people to interpret it in this context when they're already doing it now? And second, even after that much amount of information, of course, in a way, I want this conversation to be put out to the consumers, that even after, when this information, when you write this manual, when you write, based on declassified information, people just don't care.
Right. Okay. So you've come to the heart of a lot of things that bother and interest me. So let me take them sequentially. The first point is that a country like the United States is contradictory. It is founded on certain ideals of democracy and so on. And these have their contradictions. So there are always going to be people who emerge into elected office who believe very much in the ideals of a country, or they believe very much in their religious convictions and so on. Frank Church, for instance, was one of these people. Frank Church was appalled by what he was hearing that the CIA was doing. So he began, as a senator, he began to hold hearings, the church hearings. And then eventually the church committee that he impaneled published an enormous report on the CIA crimes, which any scholar of American power reads. It's available. Daniel Ellsberg worked for the US Pentagon as a contractor. He was photocopying, or reading actually first, this large document about how the United States understood the war in Vietnam and how they were lying to the public. And he decided to leak that document to the press. That becomes the Watergate or the Ellsberg files, the Vietnam papers. It leads to the fall of the Nixon government. I mean, there are contradictions. There are laws in the United States because people are actually true believers in the ideals. And that's very useful, and it's a good thing. And in fact, we should fight in all countries for greater transparency of government. I mean, government is for the people. Why don't they release documents? The Indian government has this policy in place, laws in place, but it just doesn't bother to release documents. I would like to see Indian government documents. I would like to have a Freedom of Information Act in India that actually worked, where you could actually get, documents. A right to information was passed just, whatever it is, 15 years ago. It took a long fight to get the right to information in India. So this is very important. True believers in transparency have fought for this. Secondly, it's very beneficial to intelligence operatives and so on to have some of these things released, because it shows what they are capable of doing. It's almost an advertisement. It warns people like, hey, listen, we did this to Arbenz. We made sure that when he went into exile, he was stripped naked in the airport in a strip search. And people watched him stand naked, the president of the country. We'll do this to you. We organized the death of Muammar Gaddafi. We had him stripped naked and sodomized before he was killed. And that was videotaped and put out there on YouTube. We did that. We can do that to you. That for them is a kind of machistic warning to the world that, we do it. So you get both the liberal side, the actual transparency people, but you get, the worst side, the machistic warmongers saying, look at what we can do. It's an advertisement. We've made it for you. So that's the second thing. The third thing, which is, I think, important, is the more you write about these things, the more confusion it can also end up creating. Because one side of it is you actually do the work of the CIA. I've been criticized by people saying, you interview ex-CIA agents, they tell you stories, you write them up. Is that a pipeline? Well, I don't think so. I've had ex-CIA people tell me horrible things that the United States has done. And they've told me this on the record. And I think it's important to write it up, because they also feel like they want to enter the history books. They spent their life in the shadows. But it's a debate. Should you write this? Should you not write this? I'm a believer in transparency. I think that you should expose power for its crimes. You shouldn't pretend that then I'm becoming a billboard for it. I think you should expose it for its crimes. The crimes that the United States committed in Iraq are already getting forgotten. And amnesia is a very important part of the reproduction of power. Amnesia is very important. It's very important for people to be told that Iran is a problem because of Iran. To forget the prehistory of the Iranian Revolution. Why did it happen? What was the Shah? It's incredible that the Shah's son is now trying to make a bid to return to power. I mean, that is incredible to me. It means that the world has forgotten what Savak was, what the Shah was. The Shah of Iran, they were Cossacks who were placed there by imperialism. And that doesn't even legitimize somebody not placed by imperialism. We should be beyond kings. We don't need kings in the world. What the Iranian Revolution did was to say, we want to be a republic. I think that's what I focus on. Whether it's an Islamic republic or not an Islamic republic is not the question. The Saudis hate Iran because it's an Islamic republic that's close to their borders. It's the only Islamic republic close to their borders. Indonesia, India, Pakistan, these places where the majority of the world's Muslims live are far away. But Iran is close, and it's a very bad example. They've tolerated majority Muslim countries that are republics. They in fact made a deal with Saddam Hussein to go and destroy the Iranian Revolution. Saddam was paid by the Gulf Arabs from 1980 to 1988 to conduct a really heartless war against the Iranian people, where they used chemical weapons supplied by the Federal Republic of Germany, supplied by the United States government, and so on, against the Iranians. They never allowed the Iranian Revolution to to basically come together. People say, well, look, the Islamic Republic is so horrible, this, that, and the other. Well, but consider that its early years were in war. So if it's a paranoid republic, it's paranoid because you made them go immediately into war, and sustained total war makes a state paranoid. That's exactly what happens. If you wanted another outcome, you would have welcomed the end of a monarchy, and you'd have said, now let's see what these people can do for their people. Are they committed to improving the dignity of their people and so on? But when you go to war against them, whether it's a direct war like the Iran-Iraq war, or a sanctions war, a hybrid war against Venezuela, or the blockade against Cuba, you are going to distort the internal life of the people because they are living in a permanent state of siege. Of course, there are going to be distortions. So, you asked a question about knowledge about these things. Well, but there's also amnesia. We are taught to forget. We are taught to forget the war on Iran from 1980 to 1988. It's almost as if the demonization of Ayatollah Khomeini, for instance, that happens right away, provided a way to have amnesia about the role of the United States in Iran. You can wash everything clean. In fact, same with Afghanistan. The entry of Osama bin Laden into Afghanistan from when he was thrown out of Sudan and comes to Afghanistan suddenly cleansed the story of imperialism in Afghanistan. And then it just becomes about Osama bin Laden, the Taliban, and then eventually when 9/11 happens, it's just Osama bin Laden / Taliban have to be removed. I mean, everything before that is forgotten, and it's amnesia. So the role of amnesia alongside the release of materials is extraordinary. I mean, Washington Bullets appeared in, 25 languages and so on. It is a life of its own, but it's still a marginal text. It's not capable of breaking through in a society, breaking through the amnesia. I mean, how many people go to the CIA and read their documents that are available? No, not very many people. It's not commonly looked at, that material. It's amnesia alongside the release of material, and amnesia wins.
So what you're arguing is that the selective release of information and the selective, construction of remembering, what it creates is a mythical past that fits into the narrative of the colonizer, the imperialist, and which justifies what happened at that point as a rightful moral duty of a state that is imperatively driven towards moral upliftment or liberation of the masses. So, for example, US as a liberator of a global south of sorts. Another question that I have in mind is that when you mentioned the idea of kings, so in a way that the so-called rules-based order that the US created, and US became the king of that order in a way, in terms of its sovereignty above that order itself, and it often continues to sabotage that order while retaining it for itself whenever and wherever it creates the necessary conditions for its imperial rule to continue. How do you see that?
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, I already mentioned that what the United States does, because it has immense military power and power over information, communication, is it doesn't seek external legitimacy. The fact that the US can walk away from 66 UN treaties at one go, or that, George W. Bush could walk away from important arms control treaties and so on with absolutely no consequences, is a sign that the United States does not seek legitimacy from anybody outside. Other countries do seek legitimacy from outside. You seek legitimacy from your neighbors, you seek legitimacy from your ideological, companions. If you're a government of the left, you go and visit other governments of the left. You seek legitimacy.
So you're a top predator who has exceptional existence in the order of nation states in a way, and you know that your exceptionality gives you privilege in a sense, and you exploit. One of the things that also, concerns me as somebody who is philosophically endowed with the way context and evolution happens at the same time. There is some universality to everything, but there is also particularity, and that particularity retains universality in different contexts. Say, for example, capitalism. Capitalism as a theory, it is constructed as a liberation economy. But what capitalist society in certain context, I mean, that is what Marx was saying. You've not considered power as part of the axiomatic framework of the economy that you're suggesting. That kind of economy does not exist. It's a myth. Similarly, the kind of nation state or the kind of new world order that you've made people to assume and imagine, that only exists in book. There are certain forces, certain ways in which things happen in both ways. Like you mentioned, somebody who's sanctioned, who is territorially exhausted, excluded, they find ways to create communication, financial interactions, transactions of commodities and everything. What has changed in a way in past few decades in the regime's change order? Is there some particularity, some uniqueness to what is happening now in Venezuela, in Iran, that is symptomatic or indicative of the fact that the whole ways in which regime change happens, there are certain new additions to it that people, because you mentioned fascism, so people want to fit into the classic way Hitler was fascist. No, fascism has evolved. It has its own characteristics that have adjusted to the new way the nation is constructed. Do you have something to say on that? Is there some evolutionary aspect to how all of this logic is happening in this particularity, or is it the same manual that is being reapplied?
Oh, look, frankly, the imagination for a new economics has dwindled. In Iran, we're seeing a number of protests. Whatever the reason for these protests, they're happening. The Iranian government has been quite austerity minded in its economic policy. I don't agree with the way in which the current finance minister is approaching the Iranian economy, followed it quite closely. I don't think that the austerity program is a good way. I mean, I think Iran needs to utilize its geography. It needs to dig deeper into its connections with the Belt and Road Initiative. There is another economy being built in Asia. They should actually take advantage of that much more than sort of ask the people to pay a penalty. And people don't want to pay the penalty, and then they start believing other things like somebody will save us from this. The idea of the savior arriving is very, very conducive to forms of new fascism. Somebody with a lot of with a lot of energy who says that I will grab the economy by the throat and I will make it cough out jobs. That belief is in a sort of mythical solution to a very complicated economic problem that countries like Iran are facing. I don't think the government has actually explained to the people what the gravity is or what the choices are. I think they're just asking people to sacrifice. It's not going to happen. People are upset. And this is exactly what then external forces use as a lever to get rid of inconvenient governments. I mean, it's not that you don't have problems in our countries, but we need governments to come out there and sincerely and honestly explain to people that these are problems and these are the three options we have, and we as a government have decided to choose option number two. We hope you agree with us. Option number one is something we don't want to use. Option number three is too much pain for the public. So we are asking you to do option two. That's the only thing that kind of honesty and candidness is necessary for poor countries. Think about the leaders we have. They aggrandize themselves. They don't tell people the truth. I'm impressed, to be honest with you, with for instance Xi Jinping in China, because when you read his speeches, he basically says, look, this is what we have to do because we don't have very good choices, or we as a country need to look again at how we are dealing with with children and social media, and are they studying hard enough? And he talks quite openly about family, about life, about existence, and so on. I mean, I would like more of that, because we are facing a lot of existential challenges as human beings, climate challenges, challenges of energy transformation, and so on, that we need candidness, we need sincerity and honesty, and we can't ask people forever to pay a penalty. We just can't do that. People are going to refuse at some point, and that creates a lot of problems. I mean, I just was looking at Nigeria. Nigeria for 10 years has had a public on the streets saying that, look, we are an oil producing country. Why are we being treated like this by the police? Why are we unable to have basic survival in a country that's so wealthy? I mean, in Venezuela, Nicolás Maduro, before that, Hugo Chavez would also speak pretty sincerely, saying, this is it, guys. I mean, we don't have 20, 30, 50 options. This is what we have to do. I mean, wouldn't you like to have a political class that opened the door to direct, straightforward conversation with the public, saying, look, this is our problem. We face a serious problem. And also say the last option is to have you pay a penalty. We don't want you to be penalized for what's happening. How do we prevent that? I just don't see it. Even in countries that are being hit hard by the United States, they should be in the lead in modeling sincerity. That would be my advice to them.
Let's unpack Venezuela more. Everything has a history and context. Historically speaking, at some point of time, US is well in fancies with Venezuela. It's reaping benefits, profits, like once upon a time it was doing with, Britain was doing with Iran, in a way. So tell us more about that. What was Venezuela? What was the US interests in that? And how is all of that changing in the past 7 decades? Different kinds of sovereign assertions, different kinds of configurations. What is it that is for the past few decades irking US so much?
Yeah, I mean, the problem with Venezuela isn't Venezuela, or it isn't that it has oil. The problem with Venezuela is in 1998, the population decided to elect an extremely popular politician who had been a military officer, Hugo Chavez, and Mr. Chavez decided that the new world order that was being constructed by the collective West after the collapse of the Soviet Union was not acceptable. And so he decided to start saying that, we need to exercise sovereignty over our own countries, which was really the opposite of what the World Bank was saying. And he was saying that we need to build socialism.
Just before that, can we also talk about this petrodollar order that is constitutive in a way of economic paradigm that is governing all of this relationship with US, just for viewers to really understand in the historical context in which this thing happened?
Well, this is actually much more to do with Saudi Arabia and the Gulf Arab states, because in the 1960s, when the petroleum order was getting consolidated, these countries were generating enormous profits, and they didn't know what to do with them. I mean, Venezuela a little different because it's a country with a very large population, and the profits were being taken out of the country of Venezuela by the American oil companies. Whereas in Saudi Arabia and in the Gulf Arab states, they were holding the profits. They didn't know what to do with this money. So there was a choice they faced. They could have recycled this into the world system. They could have helped, eradicate poverty. They could have helped the United Nations build a big international system and so on. But they were urged by the US government to plow it into US and European banks, the so-called petrodollar market, which then was held by the Western banking system, allowed the Western banking system to have an enormous amount of capital, which it could invest as it wished. And the Saudis were pretty happy. The Gulf Arabs pretty happy. Their money was safe. They were able to buy assets in the West and so on. That's a petrodollar market. It had to be stabilized, maintained, and so on. With Venezuela, the issue more than petrodollars was that the U.S. Oil conglomerates dominated the oil industry. They never actually allowed Venezuela to build an independent processing of the oil capacity. So Venezuela, even up to 1998, was exporting crude oil through ExxonMobil, through Chevron and other big oil conglomerates. So it, in fact, wasn't really central to the petrodollar issue because they were not generating the kind of surplus that they perhaps could have generated. Those surpluses were being already taken by the conglomerates. Having Chavez arrive and pass an organic hydrocarbon law in 2001, saying, wait a minute, we don't want these oil companies to be dominating our oil industry. We want more of the profit. We want to use it to improve the condition of people's lives in Venezuela. We want to use the money and the oil to help people in the Caribbean through PetroCaribe. We want to produce a continental and Latin American project to eradicate poverty. We want to have the left grow in this region. And that was anathema to the United States. One, the ejection of the fact that oil companies dominated Venezuelan oil. Secondly, that they wanted to use the oil to help people in Venezuela and across Latin America. And third, that Chavez wanted to use the oil wealth to promote socialism around the world. This was unacceptable.
So there's a very close by China kind of a thing, which is, I mean, geographically speaking, China is far away. So even when they required certain kind of commodity market and manufacturing market in China, so they required some petrol commodity market from Venezuela. One, it was closer by, transportation cost must be lower, but also the real threat seems to be that all of the profit that was going back to the global system that the US had created, now that profit is still retained, but it is utilized to create an alternative order or alternative global economy, an alternative way, and which is very close to US territory itself. Is that anxiety also part of it? The ideological economic project of redistribution, of creating a existence in citizens where you and I can be materially almost equivalent, even though you might be a CEO. You don't have to be 220 times richer than me. Of course, you can be 2 times richer than me, 3 times richer than me, but all this unjustified extraction of profit and then accumulating in wealthy individuals, that order also, apart from that, is also being challenged in the Venezuelan context and closer to home. Is that it?
And on top of that, you have provided a lifeline. Venezuela has provided a lifeline to Cuba, which was the most defiant of all revolutions. And not only the most defiant of all revolutions, but through the example of Fidel Castro, was contagious. Other people wanted a Cuban revolution. And the Venezuelan project gave Cuba a lifeline, and that was unacceptable. I mean, what the United States finds unacceptable about Cuba, Venezuela, these countries that are, within 100 miles, 150, 200 kilometers, whatever, of the US shores, that's what Cuba is. What's unacceptable is their defiance. I mean, they defy the United States writ. After the fall of the Soviet Union, the United States didn't want to tolerate defiance. I mean, all the people who defied were called rogue states. Remember this. The Democratic People's Republic of Korea, North Korea, rogue state. Syria, rogue state. Venezuela, rogue state. Cuba, rogue state. Iran, rogue state. It had nothing to do with them ideologically. I mean, there's very little in terms of the ideological traditions of Iran and Cuba that bring them together, except defiance, that they defied the writ of the United States. They defied Washington. That is unacceptable. That's what brings Iran and Venezuela together. It's not that they are oil producing countries. Iran and Venezuela had developed a very close relationship over the last 20 years. It's not about oil. It wasn't about the non-aligned movement. It was simply that they were being attacked by the United States for defying the rules that the US wanted to impose on them. Cuba, defiance is a key category of our era. If you defy the order of the Sahib, you will be thrashed. and you are not a, if you want to live under the writ of the Sahib, you can live under their writ. But if you defy them, then you are a problem. This is exactly the story. You can exist, but if you want to exist as yourself, then you will be wiped out. Your existence is allowed. Your physical existence as a human is allowed. But if you want to exist as yourself, if you want to be yourself, then you will be wiped out. And this is global. This is a global attitude that the most powerful country in the world enacts. It's not just against socialism; it's really against defiance that drives the U.S. crazy.
So what you're arguing or you're presenting, Vijay, is very interesting in a way that it's defiance, and whenever somebody is defiant, you have certain ways to punish them, and in a way and manner, in a certain way that certain kind of rule based order was put across people, that it's not the old sort of coloniality imperialism. It really boiled down to mostly economic imperialism in a sense, or excluding you out of that global economy. People don't really understand the cost of it. People would say, so what, there are so many people in Iran, there's so many people here, they can create their own economy, that economy can create wealth, and all that sort of hypothetical utopic exclusivist ideological project. What does a sanction, economic sanction, and hard economic sanction do to a nation?
Well, I mean, firstly, it suffocates the nation because we can't live in, we're not Robinson Crusoe. We can't live in an island. The modern economy is very complicated. You have things you need to trade with other people. World trade is very important. It may be, for a country like India with the size of India, its internal market is enormous. And so external trade, may not be such an important thing, but India has to import energy. So it has to export things to be able to import energy. And so it's always going to be linked. We are socialized in our production. We need to import chips. We need to import computers and so on. You can try and build things, and perhaps one should try and build things, but there'll always be things that one is linked to other places, to various commodity chains and so on. It's impossible to live as an island, frankly. Even if you have a huge market like China, enormous, it's still going to need to export things, import other things, and so on. So sanctions cuts you off from the modern economic life, and it creates all kinds of distortions. Because you can't legally trade, you have to open up channels for illegal trade. I mean, Hawala, for instance, the Hawala network becomes a normal thing, and everybody then gets involved in this, and it distorts legal economic activity. You start seeing, currency markets have double currency rates and bazaar rates and the government rates and so on. And then people start to speculate against the bazaar rate or against the government rate. And that creates monetary problems in a country, So sanctions distorts. That's the first thing. And then it distorts human life because you can't get access to certain medicines. You can't get access to, say, the fluids for the cleaning of your blood, for dialysis. People who need dialysis just can't get it done. That's horrible, because you have to import the fluids, etc. You really suffocate people's everyday life. It's not just economic, their health, the education. Kids can't get access to computers, or in some cases the government fears an attack because they are being attacked economically and so on, that they restrict access to the internet because they fear an information attack on their public, where, a country can come in and say all kinds of things about the government, create stories, start rumors, and the governments fear that. So they create a firewall. Well, then you have a hard time accessing certain kinds of information. You have a hard time accessing scientific journals and so on. This really does end up distorting various parts of human life. So what a lot of heavily sanctioned countries have done is they're trying their best to create a kind of socialization of sanctioned countries, open each other up to each other. I mean, it's a bad thing to interfere with rumors and lies about a country. I think it's a terrible thing. It creates all kinds of problems. It means that people don't know what's true and what's false. It creates fear and there's an explosion. Well, a car backfired, and you think, oh my God, we're under attack. In Venezuela, anytime there's a noise, people are afraid. I mean, in Lebanon, an anthropologist wrote a terrific book where he argued that people are always waiting for the next war because they are not sure which drone above their head is going to drop a bomb on them. Kids in Gaza are traumatized for generations. Any sound is scary. This is all part of the sanctioned universe. Half the planet lives in the sanctioned universe. It's the international division of humanity. They live under one or the other form of sanction or war. And the other half doesn't know what this means. They think these people are exaggerating things. They don't know what it means. That the United States prevented Venezuela from getting syringes, prevented Cuba from buying syringes from India during the pandemic. That's part of the war. That means COVID couldn't be contained as well as it should have been. The US deliberately stopping access to medication is going to put you in a sanctioned universe where you watch somebody die, you blame your government. That's the first thing you do. You don't blame the sanctions policy, you blame your government. My child is not able to get this medicine. I blame the government. I don't blame. And so then I say, let's just surrender to the United States. Let's get the medicine. That's what sanctions does to you. It in fact strips you of your dignity, and you say, okay, I'd rather live as a slave with the medication than as a free person, rather than say I'd rather die standing up than live on my knees.
Interestingly, what all of this reminded me of was how Dalits for millennium, 2 millennia they've lived, or the blacks, the African, so all of and what is happening to even Muslims today in many contexts. What I feel like is these, not just economic sanctions, all of these ideological sanctions, in a way, what it does is it restricts the potentiality of an individual and a community to outgrow its limitations, to actually perform progressive institutionalizations of whatever they want to achieve. And in a way that you rightly argued, you become a slave, consciously accepting your position in the hierarchy of whatever hierarchical normative structure that emerges consciously because you want to survive. So my last question to you, Vijay, very frankly, in a sense, that we are living in a world where, in a way, it was in certain ways positivist, that there's one kind of global world economy, economics, certain kind of ways of understanding modernity, what should be progress and everything, and that is collapsing. And what is now emerging is a multi-plural ideological indigenous projects. For some time people have experimented, they've tried, failed because of the sanctioned, still lingering power dynamics that contained all of this energies that were happening. But slightly now, it is also China being one of the examples of that there is some level of outgrowing emergence and some level of maybe end of certain global era, of certain kind of understanding of a way that the world should be governed. You are somebody, we talked, from a certain, say, ideological position. I am coming from a certain ideological position. How do you see these indigenous movements being able to outgrow this whip? When somebody says that US, in its attempt to survive, and to regain power is using violence, there are two possible ends to it. That violence may actually end up letting it consolidate more power, because people just become underconfident. Like when you mentioned the Gulf state started, Saudi started this war from petrol, by shrinking the supply of petrol, it could collapse the market. But it was the first one to also come out of it and then become subservient to US. And Iran continued to be, in a way, along with other countries, to be defiant. What kind of world do you see potentially emerging, and what kinds of new conflicts and alliances may be part of it?
Yeah, I mean, look, frankly, we believe in our institute that this is an era of hyper imperialism, but there's a new mood in the global south. But the new mood is still very weak. It's in its infancy, in a sense. That new mood is largely lifted up by the enormous economic advances and scientific advances made in Asia, with China in the lead, but also to some extent in Vietnam, in Laos, in Indonesia, in one sense, even in India. The economic growth, suggests that the center of gravity of the world economy has shifted to Asia. This has really lifted up the global south, but that new mood is fragile. It's in its infancy. It can be taken out at any moment. The US hyper imperialist attacks on Venezuela, the launching of the missiles on Sokoto State in Nigeria, the Trump again saying mother of all bombs is in the picture. You remember he dropped one in Afghanistan. All of this it suggests a long period of really difficult contest. Where people really need to be in communication with each other, to talk to each other, to get past differences, because, I mean, we are fighting to establish humanity. That's what we are fighting to establish. It's broken. And to establish humanity, we really need to have as many dialogues and debates and discussions and clarify things for people so that they are not living in various fogs of belief and fogs of inaccuracy at the same time. I mean, bringing things into the open, trying to clarify things is extremely important. It's part of what I think of as the international class struggle, and that's why I'm so happy that we had this conversation today.
Yeah, thank you very much. I am very hopeful with this conversation with you that such conversations should happen with some level of respect, some level of mutual dignified interaction rather than pre-assumed differences. And so it was for me very enlightening. Thank you very much for being here, and I hope to have these conversations with you in the future.
Thanks a lot.